Jeff Fuller with you. Trust you guys are doing exceptional and we are surviving this pandemic, the new normal. You certainly can find more information at our church website, hopeforvermont.org. And I'm the pastor at Living Hope Wesleyan Church, trying to resource us and help equip so we can certainly make disciples during this time. One that has done it well and continues to do it is Chris Surratt. Chris, welcome to the program.
Hey, Jeff, it's good to be with you.
And I'm so excited to have you on. Now, where are you located?
I am in Nashville, Tennessee. We actually live basically in downtown. It's an area called Germantown, kind of a skinny condo in downtown Nashville.
Now, how have you guys been? Because before the pandemic, you guys had some tornadoes. It's certainly been a year for all of you.
It's been a crazy year. Yeah. In fact, the tornado came through the first week of March. I think it was March 2nd. And my wife and I were in Orlando for the Exponential Conference. I was supposed to speak there a couple times. And the tornado ended up coming through our neighborhood and taking out a bunch of our neighborhood. It pretty much left our house okay. We had a little bit of damage, but our youngest daughter was still here. So we ended up getting on a plane, coming back that day, didn't get to do the exponential conference and kind of work through the tornado and the cleanup, and everything was starting to come back. And then coronavirus hits.
Yeah.
And so that kind of shut down the town like everybody else. So it's been quite a journey for the last 4 or 5 months, but we're okay.
Now, with the protests and the different rioting, has any of that hit where you are?
Yeah, there've been scheduled protests. We've had several downtown. My wife and I and our kids, we actually went down for a couple of them. We had some rioting at one of the early ones, but since then it's been peaceful and just kind of a regular protest nearly every weekend.
Now, being a thought leader and a Christian voice, how have you led your family through this, especially with the social injustice?
Yeah, it's been an interesting time. We've had a lot of good conversations, and kind of the stance that we've had is we need to listen. We think of ourselves as being aware of different races, and we live downtown, so it's very diverse where we live. But we also have realized how much we don't know, and how much we
Yeah.
don't understand, and how much we take for granted because of who we are and how we grew up. And so we have had a lot of conversations about we just need to listen instead of trying to talk and come up with our own solutions and ideas. We're just going to listen. So I followed personally a lot of people on Twitter of color that I've been listening to and just following that I never did before. And then, my kids and my wife have done the same thing. And we've had some conversations around what does that look like for our lives and how do we treat others in different ways. And so it's really been a transforming time for me and our family. And out of anything, it's just been good conversations.
Yeah, one of the best things, or I guess most impactful things that I've heard is not to see people as colorblind, because that means you're seeing people through your eyes and your experience, but to see people in all the majesty that God created them with their differences. Can you just share a little bit about where you or how you grew up with your faith journey? Was God always a part of your upbringing? What were your parents like in that realm?
Yeah. Um, Grew up in a Christian house. In fact, grew up in a pastor's home. My relatives, cousins, uncles, all pastors, evangelists, and that's kind of the world I grew up in. Before that, not so much. My grandfather had an incredible journey to faith. He was an outlaw, a bootlegger back in those days. Shot a man over stealing some of his bootleg, and it just not a good scene. And
Yeah.
before that, my family was not good. But then my grandmother and my grandfather came to Christ through a tent meeting in their little
Hmm.
town in Oklahoma. Two ladies were holding a tent meeting. Amazing thing, came to Christ, and then kind of broke the chain in our family. And from then on, we have been pastors and preachers and on church staffs. And so there's a lot of us around the United States that are on church staffs. And so, but I grew up in a church home. My dad pastored several churches in Missouri, Colorado, in Houston, Texas, and so that was kind of my upbringing. But really came to my own. level of faith in high school and college. That's where I felt like God was calling me into the ministry. And so I had to come there on my own. At first, I wanted nothing to do with being a pastor because all of my relatives were pastors, and I just thought that's just the family business. But really, God showed me that He had a route for me, and so I became a youth pastor when I was in college, and then moved to South Carolina right after getting married, and went on staff at my brother's church at Seacoast Church in Charleston, South Carolina. I was on staff there for about 15 years. Was a music director, worship pastor, and then became a campus pastor. Planted a church in Greenville, South Carolina. Pastored that for about 5 years, and then moved to Nashville and was on staff at a church here called Crosspoint Church for about 6.5 years as an executive pastor. And then for the past almost 5 years, I've been at Lifeway Christian Resources as the small groups and discipleship specialist, doing a lot of writing and talking and traveling, and training about discipleship and small groups.
What a journey that you've been on. It's interesting. You mentioned growing up in a family of pastors and not wanting to become one. The church that I'm currently pastoring is a church I grew up attending
Mm,
with my parents and my sister and cousins, and I never wanted to, nor did I dream of pastoring here. But God, I think He has a sense of humor, and He also has a plan for our lives. But I just want to get to, well, I'm just going to bring up your website here, if I can do it correctly. And you talk a lot about leading a small group can literally change the world, the importance of
mhm.
small groups. I forget who said it. I have not had an original thought in my life. I steal most everything.
I do
But
too.
somebody said that we need to be a church of small groups, not a church with small groups.
Yep.
Why is that so important?
Yeah, and I think that was Rick Warren. At least that's the first person that I've heard say that. I think it's really important if you believe that small groups are where transformational life change happens and happens best. I love Andy Stanley. I steal all my stuff too as well. Andy Stanley's another great one, and he talks about life change, sustained life change happens best within the context of community,
Hmm.
and I really believe that. And the best place that I have seen for biblical community is in a small group of believers that gather on a regular basis and study God's word and do life together. And so, if that is your belief, and so you're a church pastor and you know that community is where life change is going to happen, then I think small groups need to be an important part of that. And if it's a church that is with small groups, and that's okay, a lot of churches do that, then they're probably going to be lower on the priority list for people that are in the church, because that means they're on a menu of ministry items that people can choose from. A lot of churches will have, a midweek Bible study, a men's ministry, a women's ministry, a singles ministry, a lot of large kind of event driven type of ministries. And people are more likely to get involved in something like that than they would a group of 8 to 12 people gathering in a home on a Tuesday night, just because it's easier. There's less accountability there. None of that's wrong. But if you feel like people are going to grow best in that smaller group, then you need to think about, okay, how can it not just be an item on a menu list, but how can we be a church of small groups? So it's okay to have a men's ministry, but hey, let's build that ministry around men's small groups. Women's ministry, same thing. Let's build it around women's small groups. We can have occasional events, but let's have the goal of those events to get people into smaller groups where that life change can happen, where they can walk alongside a brother or a sister. And so, that's the difference for me, is that if you can have a church that's about small groups of small groups, then people are going to buy into it. They're going to get involved, and that's where their lives are going to change, is in that smaller group of people walking together.
And as it's been said numerous times, this pandemic has been a time where we can reset. And I know for us, our local church is right around 100 people. And so it's a great time to reset with small groups, because we live behind this wall here. And for this space, if we social distance, we could probably fit 15 people. We've been renting a school for the last 4 years, and now are not able to meet there. And some would say that, well, those 15 people, like, that is a small group just as a worship gathering. But can you just share the difference between meeting as a Sunday morning service versus that of a small group?
Sure. I mean, there. There are only so many things that you can do when you gather together for a worship service, no matter how many people that are there. It's mostly about uh, learning. You know, you're getting information, and we need a place to do that. I mean, if you look at Acts, the early church, 2:42 through 47, they experienced the teaching in the temple, and they went from home to home. So basically, I see it as we need a place where we can learn, where we can hear the gospel, and then we need a place that we can live out the gospel. And so there's two functions, and we're really seeing a lot of it blurred right now, where a lot of churches can't gather together in
Yeah.
large numbers in the temple. And so I'm seeing kind of an exciting time where we can almost get both experiences in a home type setting. A lot of churches are doing like watch parties where
Yeah.
they're encouraging their church members to get together in smaller groups in neighborhoods, watch the service online, and then talk about it afterwards. So you're kind of getting both experiences. But if you just have a Sunday morning worship experience, then you're not really able to talk it through. You're not able to share struggles of what you're going through. You're not able to take the message and apply it to your everyday life. So I think there is a room and a need for both. But a small group meeting in a home, it doesn't have to be in a home. I say a home because that's where my small group meets,
Yeah.
but it can be in a classroom at the church. It can be in a coffee house. It can be in the back of a restaurant. It can be in a break room at an office, but anywhere that you can gather and people can talk and live out what they're learning through the Sunday morning messages, that is a transformational experience. So we need both of those things.
So let me ask you this question. It comes across a little pointed, possibly, and not just in the Northeast, but where I am in Vermont, people are proud of their independence. And
Mm,
sometimes people think we'll get together on a Sunday morning when we can. Hopefully, we can return soon to that. But, I don't want to be too vulnerable. I don't want to expose too much of myself. I just want to put on a smile Sunday morning.
mm.
In your opinion, how do we break into those relationships? There's so much that's easier said than done, but small groups are so important. How do we break down those walls or those stereotypes of being vulnerable, but knowing the necessity of that for spiritual growth?
Yeah, I think we're actually experiencing a time where some of those barriers are starting to naturally go away because for most of us, we have been in quarantine, we have been isolated, we're not able to spend time with other people, with outside people outside of our family. And as human beings, we need that. We're longing for that. I mean, honestly, Jeff, I'm an introvert. So I'm a 5 on the Enneagram, if you know the Enneagram. So I'm okay with spending time with just me, and I'm going crazy. I mean, I'm just not being able to spend time with my coworkers because we've been work from home for the last 3 months, and we were doing like a monthly get together with all of our neighbors where they would come over and we would just hang out for an hour. Our small group that would come over to our house once a week. And that's draining for me, but it's necessary. And I think there are a lot of people that are feeling that right now. They need people in their lives. And so we have the opportunity as churches and church leaders to give that to them. Now, right now, a lot of it has to be virtual, but that's actually for some people, a lot of people, that's an easier first step
Yeah.
than actually going to somebody's house. Asking somebody to go over to a house of somebody they don't know that well, sit in a room circled up with 8 to 12 people. That's intimidating. And I talk about that in my first book about how that was really hard for me to do the first time. It was just
Hmm.
didn't want to do it at all. Now, being able to get in a Zoom group or a virtual group and you can still be a little bit anonymous, I think that's a baby step for a lot of people who wouldn't naturally have just gone to somebody's home. So I think we have this opportunity to give people baby steps now to get into community, to get into these relationships without taking that huge first step of going over to somebody's home or into a classroom at the church. And what I've been surprised about, Jeff, is since our group started meeting online, we all knew each other. We've been gathering for a couple of years, but they've been more open online than they were in person. There's
Hmm.
just something about the screen. They're more willing to
Yeah.
talk. They're more willing to open up. And so, even though it's more of a baby step to join, I think people, once they get into it, are going to be more vulnerable. more willing to open up just because there's that safety of being in my home, of on my computer. And so they're more willing to talk. So I think it's an interesting time to kind of get people connected in a new way that we couldn't do before when it was only in person.
Definitely. To seize that opportunity is a big point that I'm really struggling with, but really trying to learn.
Mhm.
This book, Leading Small Groups, what prompted you to write this? And were you told to write it as part of your requirements of being at Lifeway?
That's funny. That's a good question. Never been asked that. No, it was not. It was not a requirement. I actually had to go through the process that most authors do to be published. I had to present a proposal and kind of walk through that. So, yeah. So it was a journey. And the reason I decided to write this book is I wanted something for uh, for church leaders to be able to take and almost hand to a brand new small group leader or an
Mhm.
existing leader that can take them through the different steps and journey in the journey of being a small group leader. So all the way from the first of it is, how do we gather people in a small group? Because it's tough for a lot of people. If you've never led a small group, it starts with, who do I invite? Who needs to be a part of my small group? How do I get them to be in my small group? So I spent a section of the book just talking about, first of all, what is a small group? What is a biblical small group? And then how do I choose people to be in my small group? How do I invite them? How do I set up my small group? So how do I gather? Then the second part is, how do I launch? Because ultimately we want people to come back to our small group. So we want the experience to be a good one and something that people see as necessary. So how do we launch well? How do we get people to come back? And then how do we lead, which is the third section of it? How do we lead well? How do we lead gospel conversations? How do we lead difficult people? All of those intricacies that come with leading a small group. And then a section that I don't see a lot, that a lot of small groups never get to, is, how do I multiply? So if I
Hmm.
want to create generations of disciples, I need to multiply my small group. So how do I do that? How do I do that in a healthy way? And so that's why I wrote the book, because I wanted something that's not hard to read. Hopefully, it's easy to get through. But if you're a brand new small group leader, you can start from the beginning. If you're an existing small group, you can see, how can I be a better leader? And then if you want to learn, how do I multiply myself? How do I multiply my group? There's a section for that. So pretty much anywhere you're at in your spectrum of group leading, you can pick up the book and hopefully go to the next step.
That's really good. I have a question for you. I have been listening to Mitch Albom's podcast, Tuesday People, based on the book Tuesdays with Maury. And
Mhm.
he talked about when he was with Maury, the final weeks of Maury's life, the importance of physical touch, physical contact. And I know in these situations, circumstances, we have to be so careful. But I do think there is the appropriate handshake, side hug, whatever the case might be. With this pandemic, do you think it is um, weighing on people's mental health, not being able to have that physical contact in small groups? It's all virtual.
I do. Had a conversation with a friend of mine, Joseph Myers, who wrote the book Organic Community. And he talks about, we've got to learn new social cues, because we are accustomed, and it's just natural to see somebody, especially if we haven't seen them for a while. You want to hug them,
Yeah.
you want to reach out for a handshake. And with the pandemic, and who knows how long this is going to last, we have to adapt and learn new social cues. And that goes all the way down to our small group experience. We started thinking through, what is a typical small group experience for us, an in-person experience? Well, for our group, we always involve food, because I don't know why you would not, I don't know why you would go to a group that didn't have food. That's just, I like food a lot. And it's a natural kind of get people comfortable and all of that. So we would have food, but the way that we would do it is in a buffet style, where you have different bowls with the same spoons and all that gets, well, that can't happen anymore.
Right.
That's seen as dangerous in a lot of places. So we have to rethink how we offer food. We have to rethink of, if people are coming over to our house, how clean do we need to have our house? If you're going to a restaurant right now, they're really making sure that the tables are clean and you get
Right.
disposable menus and all of that, and you have to wear masks, and are we going to be okay with that? And there's all these things to think through now that we never thought about. And you talk about the mental health. Yes, I think that this time of spending, in isolation has weighed on a lot of people. And then how do I behave when I go back out into the real world? I did a webinar with another friend of mine named Evan Owens, and he's a mental health expert. He works with the
Hmm.
military specifically on PTSD. And so we talked about, on the other side of this, we're going to have a lot of broken people that are going to come out of this pandemic, out of isolation, that are going to need help. And a lot of those people are going to be in our small groups and are going to be ourselves. So we need to pay attention to that. And as church leaders, we need to equip our leaders and our small group leaders to be able to help people as they emerge out of this. A lot of habits that maybe people had given up probably came back during this time,
Yeah.
all of that. So yes, we need to pay attention to all of that.
And so I know for myself, this time has allowed me to be a little bit more creative. I'm not the most creative guy. I just like to follow sports and spend time with family. But during this pandemic, social media has been huge for me. That's where we connected. And I
Mhm.
sincerely thank you for graciously joining and being a part. You don't know me from Adam, but just wanting to resource and add value to the local church, I just find tremendous. How have you been able to use the social media platforms to engage and interact with other Christians that need that spurring on, but also that encouragement of knowing people are in their corner and ready to help resource them as we do ministry for the kingdom?
Yeah, I have a love-hate relationship with social media, which I think a lot of us do. Sometimes I don't want to be on social media, and I feel drawn back to it. Part of it is part of my job. I need to be out there on social media, but also I have had connections that have would have never happened if I didn't involve myself on social media. Some of my best friends in the ministry started through a Facebook conversation, or back in the day, a Twitter
Yeah.
conversation. And those have continued, and a lot of them have moved to in person. And I've gotten a lot of encouragement through social media. I'm involved on Facebook in a small group, pastor kind of Facebook group with tons of different small group leaders and pastors. And every day there's different ideas and just encouragement that come through that. And I love it. Uh, my involvement in Lifeway, we have a Facebook page, Lifeway Groups Ministry, where I regularly do Facebook Lives where we talk to different people and answer questions. And I did a mental health one. And so I think if it's looked at in the right way and you take time away from it, social media can be a good thing. It can fill us, but it also can empty us if we don't treat it in the right. And sometimes I have to say, you know what, that's enough. I need to take a break, or I need to mute a person occasionally. I haven't done that with you, Jeff.
Not yet.
Not yet, but there are some times that I need to do that just for my mental health reasons. But yes, I would encourage pastors, group leaders to look for those opportunities where you can have a support type system online. The group that I'm a part of is with the Small Group Network. Got hundreds and thousands of people that are involved in that, through Lifeway and through the Small Group Network. So find something that fills you up and not empties you out as much.
So, Chris, what does your personal spiritual discipline look like as far as personal devotions?
Yeah, it's important. It's really, if I didn't have that daily time in God's word, I would be in trouble. And I am in trouble when I get away from it, especially during this time. When the quarantine started, it had to throw all my rhythms away, and had to figure it out,
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
normally, I would get up and go to the gym. This is when I read my Bible. And this is when I take my kids to school, and all that got thrown out. So I had to recreate those. And I think I have a better rhythm now than I've ever had. Every morning I spend my first time of the day. I have a reading plan in God's word that I go through. Right now, I'm going through the letters of Paul. It's been great. I just started Galatians this morning. So I do that. And then I have a book that I at least spend some time in. Right now, I'm going through Tim Keller's book on prayer, because
Yeah.
honestly, that's my weakest spiritual discipline is prayer. I'm not great at it. I want to be better at it. I want to be more faithful with it. And so this book has been really good for me to go through. And so that's my normal routine. Spend some quiet time with God. I get up fairly early, and if I don't have that, I feel it during the day. I mean, I really do. My conversations are different. My meetings go differently. I'm more on edge. I'm more anxious. And so if I don't have that the first part of my day, it's not good for me personally. So that's kind of my personal rhythm on a daily basis.
Chris, are you on staff at a local church?
I'm not. I'm a volunteer. I volunteer with Crosspoint, where I was on staff. I'm a group leader there. I also help work with the pastoral team there. Help lead a pastoral group for people that are coming up through the ranks and kind of wanting to be pastors. So I do some of that, but I'm not on staff right now.
How do you balance that? I was a director of mentoring a Christian faith-based organization, and I tried to attend a local church as well before becoming the pastor. And it was a hard dichotomy, maybe that's the word, where I wanted to get involved, but I felt like I was pouring myself so much that I couldn't get involved. How have you been able to balance that or have a healthy rhythm with that?
Yeah, it was tough at first. I spent 24, 25 years of my life on full time church staff. That's all I knew. And so when I left staff, I guess 5 years ago, I was lost, to be honest with you. At first, I was like,
Hmm.
what do I do on Sundays? It was really odd to go to church with my family and just attend a service and then be able to leave afterwards. I mean, Crosspoint is a large church, so we had multiple services. At one point, we were running like 7 or 8 services on a Sunday, so that was a full day for me, and so it was really, really different. But it took me some time to kind of figure out where my sweet spot was, where my family wants to serve. One of the things I did at the beginning was connect with my pastor, with my campus pastor, and just say, what do you need? Where can I be beneficial? Where can I fit in? Not assuming anything just because I've been on staff, but where can I fit in? And he was like, hey, we really just need you to be a small group leader. And so that's what we did. We stepped in as a small group leader, did that for a season, still leading that small group. But then about a year after that, they came to me and said, hey, what do you think about working with this group of staff that are wanting to be pastors and start kind of mentoring with them? So did that and started doing that. So it was kind of building it one step at a time instead of just jumping in and say, I'm going to be full time on staff at Lifeway, and I'm going to be full time helping out with the church. We kind of just figured out where we needed to be and where we fit the best and kind of find that rhythm slowly but surely. And now, almost 5 years into it, we feel like we have a good balance between the two. But it was definitely hard at the beginning. I wanted to jump in and do it, and do everything I was
Yeah.
doing, but it wasn't the season for that.
So now a personal question, and that is, how do you lead your family? Because I know I my family is great. I love them. My son just graduated high school. He's looking to go away to college this fall. We're kind of
Mm,
mourning the fact that he's leaving. We're so close. I just love my son and daughter. And then I officiated at a funeral, and then I took a nap after. But then my
mm,
wife came home, and the dishes weren't done, and I have a home office, and not that she makes me feel guilty, but sometimes I feel guilty because I can't get everything done, or I feel guilty because I was short with my daughter, but then I put on a
mhm.
smile at the funeral. How do you lead your family well, allowing them to see that you're normal, but also allowing them to see that you're passionately pursuing Jesus in the whole process?
Yeah, it's different seasons, different ways. We're the same way. We have a daughter that is now, she's going to be a senior in college this fall. Watching her leave was uh, hardest thing I've done in my life. I talk
Hmm.
about when I dropped her off at college. I'm not a crier. Like I said, I'm a 5 on the Enneagram, so I tend to keep things inside.
So I'm a
We,
three. I'm a three
okay.
with a two wings, so I cry often.
Okay, well, you're better than I am. I bawled. I mean, we dropped my daughter off at college in South Carolina. She goes to the University of South Carolina. It's about a 6.5 hour drive. I think I cried for about 4 of those hours on the way home. It was just really difficult. But yeah, a different season. Then our other daughter is a senior in high school this fall, so it has evolved along the way. But to be honest with you, Jeff, I've learned a lot about leading my family better now that I'm not on a church staff than when I was
Hmm.
on a church staff, because we tended to get wrapped up in doing the work of the ministry instead of being in the ministry.
Yeah.
And my family was the same way. I planted a church. And so every Saturday, we went up as a group and we got everything ready for the Sunday morning services. We put out the chairs. My kids were involved in that. And a lot of that was good. They got to be, in the ministry and see it ministry. But I found myself being a Sunday morning pastor and not a 7-day week
Hmm.
father and leader in my home. And so I've learned a lot since not being on staff to spend more time, to have more conversations with my kids. I just naturally before thought, well, they get it on Sundays, right? They get it in their kids ministry,
Yeah.
and they do, but they need to hear from me. They need to hear from my wife and I. And so one thing that's been interesting is since church services have moved online, we're having more conversations about the message and about what we've
Hmm.
listened to after the message than we were before, because church would end, you get out, you try to fight the crowds, you get in the
Right.
parking lot, you got to get to the place where you're eating lunch. Well, now it's okay, turn on the couch and let's have a conversation.
Hmm.
And so we've had some more in-depth gospel conversations now than we ever did before, just because we're in our home. Now I do want to return someday to the in-person gathering, because there's something about worshiping together with people. But it's been a good actual change for our family for this season.
Well, thank you so much. A couple questions, then we'll get you out. But this is Chris Surratt. ChrisSurratt.com is where you can find more information specifically about the book Leading Small Groups. And we want to be a church of small groups, not with small groups, on social media at Chris Surratt. Surratt. You said either, so
You can
we'll
go
go
either
with
way.
go with both. Um, as we look at this pandemic, I talked to a basketball coach, and they said that for his athletes, he wants them to come back like they gained a season, they didn't lose a season.
Mm.
How can the church come back, rebound as though they gained a season versus losing one?
I think that's a great way to put it. I've heard also, don't waste a crisis.
Yeah.
That's a business term, but I think that's something that we can use in the church world. I think it's causing us to rethink metrics
Hmm.
as a church. Before, the major metrics were people in seats gathering together on a Sunday morning. How many can we get in the building at one time? Well, that's changing. And now what we've got to look at is, how are we engaging people? How are we connecting them together into ministry, and not necessarily in a large gathering? Different places of the country are opening up in different ways, but I know that churches in the South that have opened up are seeing really small numbers for in-person gatherings. Even though they've opened up, they're seeing 25-30% of what they were seeing before. And so they're having to rethink, okay, how do we do ministry? How do we gauge the health of our ministry? How do we gauge our metrics? All of that has to change. And I think a lot of that is good. I think a lot of times we've learned to rely on big numbers of people gathering on Sundays, instead of looking at how are they engaging, how are they being changed, how are they being equipped, how are they being connected. And so I think coming out of this, we need to change our metrics. What are we
Yeah.
looking at? And then how do we engage people where they are? It's also forced the church to go into people's living rooms and upgrade their online communities in online gatherings. And I think all of that is a good thing and shouldn't go away when things go back to whatever the new normal is, whenever it happens.
So the final question I have for you, and certainly calculate your words as needed, necessary. There is an election coming up. There is a country in which we live that seems very divided, and there are those that would promote one aspect of the voting, just that kind of overlooks several things. Um, how does this country heal when so many Christians put stock in the voting process versus that of submitting to the Lord's authority?
Yeah, you hit it. I mean, I think that to heal and to come together, we're going to have to look at the kingdom of God, and it's the gospel, and everything works out for His glory and His good. No matter who gets elected in the fall, ultimately it's in God's plan. And some of it I think is good, because I think the church thrives when there is crisis. I think the
Yeah.
church thrives when it is persecuted. And so I think that some of the things that are being talked about is going to press the church to really figure out, why do we exist? Why are we here? And if it's not for purely the gospel, then what are we doing? We're just causing more division. And so I think a lot of it is a refining time for us as leaders, as the church, to decide, why are we here? Where are we leading our people? How are we leading our people? And is it toward the gospel, or is it toward division? And it's, we've got to make that decision. And ultimately we won't come together until we're all, as Jesus said, showing love for one another. That's how they're going to know that we are Christians. And so that's what's got to rule the day, is listening, loving, and pushing people towards the gospel.
Oh, so good. Hey, Chris, thank you so much for making the time and hanging on for several minutes. Certainly a pleasure for me. I just wanted to share that Instagram. I don't know if you were on, but I posted a picture of you on Instagram and your book. And then after, I told my wife, I think, that, man, it's so hard not meeting people because I think I have the right picture. Well, my daughter overheard, and then she posted on Instagram, "Are you sure this is the right guy?" So that came from my daughter eavesdropping on a conversation with my wife. So
That's funny.
anyway,
I'll look at it to make sure. I'm sure it is.
thank you so much. Be well, be safe, and keep directing people towards Jesus. It's been a pleasure getting to know you and following you as I have. So thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for the opportunity. It's good to meet you.
And again, that's Chris Surratt. You can follow him on Twitter and Instagram at Chris Surratt, certainly on the line at chrissurratt.com. We'll be back with more interviews, and we just know people's stories will make our story better as we listen and look to Jesus during these